Now this video is not something that most people are going to like or want to hear, but I have to say the truth whether you like to hear it or not. So here it is. Vishvavani is a Sanskrit term. Vishvavani. Vishvavani. I asked Thomas Egenes, or Egenes, I'm not sure how he pronounces his name, who's a Sanskrit scholar, living and working at Fairfield, Iowa, at MUM, Maharishi University of Management. And I think I met him once when he was coming in and I was about to leave, back in 78. In any case, I asked him a question by email. I said, what would be the Sanskrit term for a woman who brings you your karma, who is a porthole for the world karma that the man deserves? It's out there in the world, but it doesn't come to him except through the woman. What would be the Sanskrit term for that function that the woman serves as? And he said, let me think about it. And he got back to me, Vishvavani. Okay? So, this is important, because men... Let me stop for a minute, it's getting too cold in here, I have to close my bedroom door. Because men are usually in isolation to the rest of their environment. That's why they're able to accomplish so much, and why women are anchor weights. That's why the old bachelor theory is, why would I want to be married? The woman is just an anchor weight. She'll weigh me down. Well, she doesn't weigh you down. She just allows your karma to come to you. That will weigh you down. Okay? So, if this is the function that woman holds, then it's appropriate to quote Charlie. If karma must come, then let it come. But woe to whom, through which it must come. Alright? So if you've got the unfortunate task of karma to come through you to reach somebody else, oops, it's because you've got such a low consciousness or low standard of living that you allow yourself to be used by nature through no choice of your own, but through error of omission of your own, to allow yourself to be used by nature for somebody's bad karma to come through you, and you're the messenger, and they blame you. Okay? This is very important. This is very significant. Just about all of us make this mistake. Now, I watched a movie last night, so this is partly a movie criticism. Movies are inspirational for me, especially if I don't like them. And I didn't like this movie. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer. Should be a good movie, right? Hated it. Oh, God, was it messed up. But I learned something from it. It's only one line in the whole movie. They give it short shrift, very short shrift. But for me, it was the only worth of the whole movie. Other than the fact that, he plays basically the anti-hero. Robert Downey Jr. plays the guy who doesn't want to be the hero. The schmuck, the putz, who doesn't want to be the hero, but is forced by circumstances to become a hero. And boy, is he heroic at the end. Unbelievable. He even tops Val Kilmer. Okay? Good old Val Kilmer. He tops him. Val Kilmer is laying there as good as dead. He looks dead. And yet, Robert Downey Jr. gets up off the ground, and kills all the bad guys single-handedly. I mean, that's pretty heroic. And already he's got a bullet in his chest. At least one. So, okay, I got that. That was obvious. But there was something not so obvious to most people, and this is worth pointing out to all of you, so here it is. The main premise of the movie is this younger sister. See, Robert Downey Jr., his character is trying to make out, and because he's already fallen in love with this girl, and she doesn't like him. And he's trying to convince her that he's worth her attention. Well, she has a younger sister who they think has been murdered. Turns out she wasn't murdered. She committed suicide. Why? Because she left home looking for an alternative father, a father who shall be an alternative to her own, a person who happens to love the same line of books that she loves, by the same author. And, we both have something in common. You're older than me, so you can serve as my daddy figure. And she's disappointed, and everybody thinks she was murdered. But no, she committed suicide because she was disappointed. It turns out that she was being let me phrase this correctly. She was having sexual relations with her father. Okay, this is the younger sister of the two women. Now, they gave hints earlier in the picture, but I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. I'm so blind. Well, they come out and say it at the end, and oh, okay. But then it took me a while to figure out something very important here that nobody else is going to get unless I lay it out for you. Okay, so here it is. I look at other cultures, okay? We're not, just because we're imperialistic, doesn't mean we're the best thing since sliced bread. We like to think we're the only thing since sliced bread. And being an imperialistic culture such as the United States is, you know, this is one of the gripes that other cultures have with us, particularly the Arabian, the Islamic nations, not because they're fundamentalists, just because we're jerks, we're pricks. It's amazing what we are. And we represent that prickishness, whether or not you or I agree with it. We're Americans, so we represent that theology. Because this whole nation is predicated on imperialism to prop up the weak dollar to keep it afloat. If we were not imperialistic, our dollar would be so worthless in the world market. We would not have a good standard of living anymore because we wouldn't be able to buy anything. Our dollar would have no buying power. We are lying to ourselves to think that we have sufficient buying power to continue to import goods and services from outside our country. It's a lie. And we live that lie with our head in the sand, okay? So we're imperialists. And that blinds us to how much we're hated by the world because of our imperialism. Okay, we steal. We have corporations that go and steal other people's water rights just so we can have Coca-Cola, all right? So don't think you can sit high on your hog and say, oh, America, we're the greatest. No, we're not. We're shit. We're shitheads, too, to top it off. Because we allow it to happen, because we don't get out in the street and protest. Or do boycotts like Cesar Chavez used to do, okay? So we're shitheads. We may not be jerks, we may not be pricks, but we are pricks and jerks to the rest of the world, and you and I are shitheads for not doing something about it, by not objecting, okay? All right. So we have a movie that depicts molestation, okay? Sexual relations between a daughter and her father as being molestation. Let me give you an example of when this is not the case, all right? In our culture, an example. And the example is the guy, the tall guy, who was in the Mamas and the Papas quartet, okay? It's about the best way to sing. It's kind of like a barbershop quartet because they all sing in harmony. The tall guy. From what I can surmise, his family was a nudist. His wife, himself, when he was with her, and the daughter. They were nudists, okay? But he went the extra step that his wife didn't go, and he had relations with his daughter. And apparently his daughter was all fine with that, because they had relations in a hotel room, and that led to some, how shall I put this, grilling, that the establishment, quote-unquotes, put this guy's feet to the coals, because they didn't approve. But they were doing something else, and it wasn't just sex in a hotel room. Once his daughter reached of age, the age of majority, they were still doing it, right? They did drugs, though, as well. And that's what really sunk their ship, in my opinion. Because now society had something to nail him with, okay? Because the daughter was of age, and she was of age of consent, see. We don't consider somebody under the age to have the right to consent, even though they may. But being in a nudist colony, I know there is such a thing as consent by a minor. There is such a thing. It happens, okay? You just won't hear about it. Now, why is that? Because they mutually respect each other. So there's no molestation involved. They both consent because they both respect each other. Okay? And they treat each other humanely, fairly. Okay. But the rest of society doesn't. Now, this is what wears down the situation. If you live in a culture that doesn't approve, the first thing to go is the woman, especially if it's a child woman, as opposed to, an older woman with a young guy. because the child is going to be very susceptible to peer pressure. And women are going to be susceptible to peer pressure. And if it's both a child and a woman, doubly vulnerable, potential for vulnerability to peer pressure. But that doesn't mean they have to flake and fold. If they are honestly, stably in love with each other and respect each other and treat each other in a humane fashion, they will be immune from attack. But there's one other thing they have to be immune to, and that is not to lose their self-respect under peer pressure. So they can't lose their respect for each other, but they also cannot lose their respect with themselves. And that's where the drug abuse comes in. It undermines their credibility, or the guy's credibility with himself, because he became forlorn, because he was attacked, because he was abusing himself with drugs, you see. That was his failing, his self-respect. Not the mutual respect they had for each other. They both loved each other. But his love for himself was undermined because he was abusing himself with drugs. Why? Because he was famous and he couldn't handle the fame. I don't know. Whatever. For whatever reason. Okay? Now, I say this because I compare other cultures. The Russian culture. Okay? I've seen evidence that has led me to believe that A, they're being used to teach us right from wrong by our standards of what's socially acceptable. But by way of example, because in their culture it's okay. And you know what? It's not called molestation, and they don't have peer pressure to ruin the woman component in the relationship, or the child for that matter, because their society doesn't poo-poo it, and consequently, the child who is functioning as Vishvavani, or the woman, or both, if it's both a child and a woman, to take the rap, to be the weak link in the chain, and take the rap for what society deems to be incorrect, which has nothing to do with how they treat each other. That's something else, you know. That's something else. There are women, grown women, who allow themselves to be sore down there, okay? So you can't call it molestation by way of physicality. That's not it. It has to do with consent by the parties involved. Both parties have to consent. And this is where marriage comes into the picture. What is the function of marriage? It's not because two people love each other. That has nothing to do with it. It's because society approves of their marriage. And let me give you another example. There was a book written by an amanuensis. He was using automatic writing because somebody else was the author. The author was a fellow by the name of Philos the Tibetan. The amanuensis was Frederick Spencer Oliver, and the book was published in 1899 by a Los Angeles printing house, and it's called An Earth Dweller Returns, or, the alternate title, A Dividing of the Way. And because the publisher changed the script, sections of it had to be rewritten and republished with additional material and published independently, or self-sufficiently, I should say, by a group of self-made publishing house run by the Lemurian Fellowship in Ramona, California, using records from their Sach underneath Mount Shasta, and their other Sachs underneath Mount Gregorio, I believe it's called, near Palm Springs, just north of Palm Springs. And they have another Sach, those are the only two I know of for sure. Mount Shasta and Mount Gregorio, near Palm Springs. And Mount Shasta, of course, is near Redding, California. So this printing house is located in Ramona, and they had to publish this because the publisher of the 1899 edition made up this thing about soulmates as being something other than the soul mated to the higher self. That's what soulmate means. But he created this fiction of two people falling in love, you know. Oh, it's my soulmate. That's not what the book... And this is where this phrase came from. It was from some mishigas performed by this publisher in Los Angeles who wanted to make an extra buck. Okay, make a romance out of it. Oh, sell more copy. By lying. Because Frederick S. Oliver had already died at the age of 22, I think, and his mother posthumously gave the script to the publishing house, and so she didn't know anything to oversee proofreading the script, the final script, and it was huge. It's something like several hundred pages long, so I don't think she would have proofread it, but she wouldn't have known anything to proofread it. So the publisher got away with it. Well, Frederick S. Oliver was paying off a debt, which he still has yet to pay off. It's humongous. He was an evil Atlantean priest, and his evil came about because he sought revenge. Why? Because he fell in love with someone. Let's assume it's a girl. I'm presuming it's a girl. But it was, despite that, it was still in the culture that he was living, and this is long before Atlantis, long before Lemuria. It might have been in Lemuria. It was not supported by his society, by his culture. It was a forbidden love, and the society refused to allow them to culminate their love interest with each other, and he forever held the grudge, and really took it out later on, especially when he became a priest in Atlantis. He acquired special powers by making a pact, so to speak, with the devil, with nature, simply to get even. Black magic, black arts, simply to get even. And that's the karma that he incurred, was using magic, power, cities, for the purposes of getting even. Okay, so that makes it evil. That's the only reason why magic, yogic powers could be evil, is because of how you use it. The guns don't kill, people kill. It's how you use the gun, right? So, not that I want a gun around. Not that, or for that matter, nor do I want to eat flesh necessarily. I'd rather be a vegetarian. If I had my druthers, I'd rather be a vegetarian. So, this is a good example of what marriage means. It has nothing to do with love. Love is between you and the other person, or other people, if it's, a menage a trois or greater. It has nothing to do with the individuals who are directly involved. It has to do with everybody else, how they observe and judge the situation. So marriage is a function of society. It's not a function of the individual. Hell, sex is the function of the individual. And marriage is simply, what do you call it? It approves of the sex, That's all. That's all it is. So you're not going to find... It's hard enough for gays to get married, right? Let alone a child with a parent, a child with an adult, let alone a child with its parent. Okay? Maybe in ancient Egypt it happened, but in the time of Akhenaten, and even he was not supported by his surrounding culture, making out with his kids. So it only happens in sexually repressed societies, and Egypt circumcised their baby boys. So think about that next time you want to think about what's permitted and what's not permitted. Yet, circumcision was never king in Russia. It never had a foothold. It used to have a foothold in Europe and in Great Britain, and it's no longer there. It's been wiped out. We still hold on to it. We still hold on to circumcision and this idea of molestation. Unless, of course, you're a nudist, in which case you'd be hypocritical to be against incest, molestation, and be a nudist at the same time, unless you are afraid of not being accepted by your surrounding culture, which is not going to accept you anyway. In today's world, nudists, are you kidding? They've all been shut down, all the nudist camps. The last one to shut down was Elysium Fields in Topanga Canyon in L.A. L.A. used to have several, and that was the last one left standing before it got shut down. Not because, actually the city of L.A. was fighting at the city council of L.A., and they finally came to a truce only after it cost the nudist camp multi-million-dollar lawsuit it was fighting for 25 years with the city council. City council had humongous money at its resources, at its beck and call. It didn't care. So it ran the camp into the ground with a humongous debt, and they could never break even after that, and they lost their clientele. It became more and more unpopular to be a nudist, and so they couldn't bring, and they lost their main money-making arm to Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner created his Playboy magazine, and it undermined the ability for the founder of Elysium Fields to make most of his money publishing nudist magazines, oriented to the nudist mentality. So he was pushed out of the business, and so the minor funding came through membership. It was minor. That's why it was a slow death anyway. So it's really peer pressure from our culture that's killing nudity and redefining sexual relationships for us, on our behalf, for our own good, as if we don't know what's best for ourselves. You know what is best? Is to respect one another. We have forgotten Christ's message, all for the sake of the institutionalization of various ideologies that have to be mangled in order to be institutionalized. You can't just take them as they are, because you couldn't make an institution out of it in its utter purity. There'd be nothing to institutionalize. You'd simply do it, right? And you couldn't formulate an institution around that. It's not possible. Trust me. Constantine would not have instituted the two councils of Nicaea around the 4th and 5th century AD, I believe it was, if it weren't for the fact that the followers of Christ, the credo of the followers of Christ could not be institutionalized as it stood because it was too pure. Okay? You have to twist it. You have to mangle it. You have to put some lies in there in order to institutionalize it, in order to force it on people. Because you can't force the truth. It's up to people to decide on their own whether or not they want to engage in the truth or not, to their level of consciousness. You can't force truth on people. Charlie Lutz said this all the time. It's all based on your level of consciousness, whether or not you can accept the truth, that particular truth. So knowledge is structured in consciousness because truth is structured in consciousness, and you can't accept a truth that's greater than what your consciousness will allow you to accept. There's just no way you can do that otherwise. Maharishi said so. He quoted the Vedas. Knowledge is structured in consciousness. Richo akshare parame vyoman. There's no way around it. So how can you expect the credo of the followers of Christ to be forcible on anyone? You can't. You can't force it on anyone. So I'm telling you, molestation has nothing to do with it unless you physically hurt someone or you disrespect them. You hurt their psyche. You have to harm them somehow. But if you don't harm them, the only other people left remaining that could harm the individuals, the parties directly involved with each other, is society itself. Trust me, they can. Society can do it for you. Society can paint you with such an evil brush that the poor child will be left traumatized because they think they've been molested. Okay? Whether or not they actually have been, which is separate. A separate consideration, not to be confused with each other. Okay? Those are two separate molestations. Molestation by society, painting a dreary picture of them, of what they're doing, or and this is not exclusive, or this is inclusive, which means it could be exclusive. It doesn't necessarily mean it's exclusive. It could be inclusive. Or molestation directly by the parties involved, by the other parties who's engaging with you. There are plenty of people who molest other people, but to everybody else they have a beautiful face. And nobody complains because they single you out, get you alone, and nobody knows you've been molested all by yourself. Hey, trust me, I've got a roommate who does that big time. So, you can have molestation directly happening between two parties and nobody else knows about it, and society lets it go because society does not disapprove. Hey, it's your choice. You're the sucker. You allowed yourself to be suckered into that. Well, if you're a child, you wouldn't know any better. Okay? So you can be molested by somebody in a relationship, and society will not disapprove. Or you cannot be molested by somebody in a relationship, but society will think you've been molested because society disapproves. Or you can be molested by somebody and society will recognize it as being a molestation because they understand. Or the fourth possibility is you were not molested, and society doesn't recognize you as being molested either. You see, there are four possibilities, simply on the basis of combination, not because of anything else. It's unbelievable. Not based on a permutation in which you would have a dominant deciding on behalf of the submissive, but because on pure combinatorial combination. And what are all the combinations possible of what could happen? And that's what happens. Those are all the combinations. But you have a society that's geared a certain way that paints a certain picture. Because in Russia, they don't paint that picture. And so they don't see it as molestation. I don't even know what I don't know Russian, so I don't know how they would describe it. So I'll leave it up to a Russian who knows the vernacular that's applied, the idiomatic vernacular, let's put it that way, because they may not even have a word for it, but they may have an idiomatic cliche that describes a situation in which it's accepted because they're not hurting each other, and society does not disapprove. Either. Society takes a neutral role, in other words. It doesn't disapprove and it doesn't approve, it just takes a neutral role because that's the way their society views the situation. Okay? This is very important. To include society when we start talking about incest and molestation. Don't leave society out of the picture. And don't leave out of the picture whether or not the two people respect each other. Irrespective of what society respects or irrespects. Okay, that's irrelevant to considering how the parties directly involved view and treat each other. Okay? This is very important. Because I could see this as an undercurrent theology being taught to people through the agency of this movie. It's probably why I didn't like the movie, because Robert Downey Jr.'s character is constantly bitching, kvetching, yada yada yada, as a narrator. Oh my God, that's like somebody drawing their fingernails across the blackboard throughout the entire movie. Oh, God, was that annoying. God, was that annoying. And it was bad enough that the story, the plot, took a while to accelerate and get interesting. So I had to keep fast-forwarding by chapter by chapter, really hop, skip, and jump fast-forward, because it was a horrible movie. It didn't move, and nor did it move me, until the action picked up at the end. But then they threw in the punchline that this younger sister had been molested by her father. Now, we don't know how. We never asked her opinion. We are never given the chance to know what her opinion is. Okay? The movie, society, has decided for us on our behalf, on behalf of her character. We just assume she didn't like the relationship. How do we know she liked it? Or whether she liked it or not? We don't know that. We don't know that. All we know is that the older sister wanted to go back and rescue her younger sister at some point. So it was the opinion of the older sister that the younger sister didn't like it. But we don't know how much of society influenced the older sister's opinion. For that matter, how much of society influenced the younger sister's opinion of herself going through it. Hey, if society's going to brand you, you're not going to like it. If society's going to brand you as the victim, you're not going to like it. You're going to have a hard time not liking it. All right? That's a double negative. So you're going to go along with what society says. Unless, and here's the catch, unless you have the psychology of Charlie Lutz. In the words of Lynn Napper, he paid homage to Charlie when Charlie passed by calling Charlie the universal friend. You know who else was a universal friend in history? King Arthur, Alexander the Great. They were universal friends. Those are two good examples. David Crockett. 3 examples besides Charlie Lutz of universal friends. People who are friendly with everyone, who don't know how to make an enemy. You know who else is a universal friend? Charlie's wife, Helen Lutz. She made absolutely no enemies. Okay? That's a lot of examples of what it means to be a universal friend. Just think of those people, if you know them, or if you know anything about them. Think of them. David Crockett, a congressman par excellence, who had to leave Congress because he was surrounded by shitheads, all right? Who took bribes left and right, who didn't do their job, you know? But David Crockett did his job. And notice I did not say Davy Crockett, because Davy Crockett is the legend. David Crockett is the person. I read a book from UCLA Research Library that made the distinction, because it was the biography of David Crockett, not the biography of the legend that we have come to know as Davy Crockett, okay? So there's David Crockett the man, as opposed to Davy Crockett the legend. And David Crockett was an individual of high moral standards, just like King Arthur, okay? King Arthur is a good example. Very high moral standards. And very similar, the two of them. The parallels are uncanny, all right? Go out among the people and live with the people to find out firsthand what they think about you, you know? What do you think, you know? And go in disguise, no less, you know? In the case of King Arthur. In the case of David Crockett, he just came out and asked you, what do you think of the job I've been doing while I've been in Congress? Or now that I'm going to go into Congress, what do you think I should, know about? And the people would tell him. And he'd go and do it and find out how much resistance he had while he went to try to do his job in Congress. It wasn't easy. It wasn't even possible. That's why he checked out and decided not to be a congressman, because he realized he couldn't do his job. He couldn't do his job because Congress wouldn't let him. His fellow congressmen would not let him, let's put it that way. So this is what you would call a universal friend, somebody who can communicate with anyone. Anyone, and I mean anyone, like animals. Communicate with anyone because he's friendly with anyone. He's respectful and considerate of everyone. I can't claim that. But I know what it means. I know, to recognize it when I see it. Okay? This is the kind of person who will not be touched by social pressures. And you know what? My son qualifies. Because my son will be friendly with whomever he's with. It's a bunch of garbage to say he's got to be with his foster parents. No. He will excel no matter who he is with. Because he is a universal friend. He is universally friendly with whoever he is with. He will not have anything against anyone. Okay? So there was a point to this video, and I finally got to the point. I can't help talking about my son, even if I don't try to. There's no way around it. Eventually, I'll end up talking about him. Isn't that what parents in love with their children do? They can't stop thinking about their children. They might be distracted by personal interests of their own. Case, I've got health problems, so I think about health. I think about the chemistry and the electricity behind it to try to figure out how to be healthy. And I have to understand the chemical and electrical nature of the health practice involved, or else I'm not going to fully understand the practice to be able to get the maximum mileage out of it, and to know the hazards along the way and avoid them. But when I'm not being distracted, I can't help but be led by my line of reasoning on the subject that I'm thinking about, health, or the movie, our sexuality in this case, and not end up with my son. Because I understand where he's coming from. And I understand where everybody else is coming from and why it's not going to work to be openly have my son with me except by some miracle or some act of leverage that would shame people into understanding that they should be the last ones to cast a stone. That's the only way it could possibly work out. How else could it work out? Shame people to humble them not to cast the first stone anymore. That's the only way it's going to happen. So, now you know what I think.